They told me the gods were dead. I watched them die screaming. For 19 years I served as Lex Mechanic, Tertius aboard the black ship Eternal Vigil, cataloguing the psychic echoes of souls claimed by the warp. Then I encountered something that shouldn't exist, memories of deities predating the Emperor's light, clawing their way into reality through the nightmares of dying psychers. How do immortals comprehend oblivion when oblivion develops consciousness and hunger? My name is Hadris Ven, and this is how I learned that even gods can be devoured. The archive deck was maintained at 11 degrees. Cold enough to preserve data cores. Cold enough that my breath formed clouds when I spoke the litany of verification. I had processed 3,000 psychic death recordings in my service to the Imperium. Each one meticulously logged, cross-referenced, sealed against corruption. The Eternal Vigil collected psychers from 100 worlds, brought them to Terra for the Emperor's consumption. My duty was to catalogue what remained, the psychic residue that clung to their final moments before the Golden Throne devoured their souls. I was good at my work. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica had commended my efficiency 7 times. My classification matrices were used as training templates for other Lex Mechanics. I believed every soul we harvested served the Emperor's light. I believed the Astronomican's hunger was holy. I believed my precision in recording their deaths honored their sacrifice. The anomaly appeared in recording cycle 43-847. A psyker from a backwater world called Norn's Reach, classification Epsilon 7, marginal potency. His psychic impression should have been routine fear, pain, dissolution into the warp's currents. Standard template. I began the extraction protocol at the 9th hour past midnight bell, alone in archive chamber secundus as was standard procedure. The data slate interface hummed as I activated the recording crystal. The first deviation appeared immediately. The psyker's final moments didn't dissolve into incoherent terror. They resolved into narrative structure. Impossible. Psychic death, echoes were fragmented, shattered consciousness bleeding into the immaterium. This had coherence. Purpose. I cross-referenced against 3,000 previous recordings. 0 matches. I should have flagged it for inquisitorial review. I should have sealed the crystal and filed a deviation report. Instead, I leaned closer to the interface and let the memories wash over me. I saw through dying eyes. Not the psyker's eyes. Someone else's. Something else's. A warrior standing on a bridge made of screaming faces, spanning a chasm that swallowed light itself. The warrior wore furs and iron, carried a spear that crackled with lightning that had never known sky. Behind him others. A woman whose eyes held winter's cruelty. A man missing one eye, ravens circling his shoulders, each bird's cry a word in a language I shouldn't understand but did. Thor, Frigg, Odin. The names materialized in my consciousness like shrapnel. The warrior looked down into the chasm. The warp looked back and laughed. I terminated the connection. My hands shook. I logged the incident as corrupted data, recommended crystal destruction, filed the report at 3rd hour after dawn. Standard procedure for compromised recordings. The crystal was incinerated by 6th hour. I watched it burn in the sanctified furnace, watched purple flames consume silicon and psychic residue. I told myself it was contamination, warp bleed, random neural firing from a dying brain. I almost believed it. The second recording arrived 11 days later. Different psyker, different world, same impossible memories. This time I saw the woman Frigg standing in a hall constructed from bones that still screamed. She was calling names. Balder, Faceti, Heimdall. The names of her children. I understood without knowing how I understood. She called and only echoes answered. Echoes with teeth. The warp took her voice mid-scream and made it into something that sang. I heard that song for hours after I terminated the connection. It promised warmth and ending and love twisted into hunger. I didn't report this one. I told myself I would after I verified the pattern, after I confirmed it wasn't isolated corruption. I needed more data. That's what I told myself. The truth was simpler and more damning. I needed to understand. 19 years of cataloging death had built coluses over curiosity, but something in those impossible memories had broken through. These weren't random warp hallucinations. They had structure. History. They referenced each other. I began searching the archives without authorization. 17 million recordings spanning 4 centuries of psychic harvesting. I wrote a search algorithm keyed to specific markers. Linguistic patterns, conceptual frameworks, mythological resonance. I ran it during third shift when oversight was minimal. It took 3 weeks. The results arrived while I was verifying transmission logs from the tertiary holding cells. 470, 3 matches across 200 years. 470, 3 psychers had died carrying fragments of the same impossible narrative. The pattern was geographic. Every recording came from psychers harvested from worlds in segmentum obscurus, Ultima Sector, Subsector Fenris. Worlds with Norse cultural coding. Viking descendants scattered across the stars during Old Night, keeping their myths alive through 10,000 years of isolation. When the Imperium reclaimed them, they bent knee to the Emperor, but kept their old stories. Stories that apparently didn't die when the believing stopped. Stories that had found their way into the warp and become something else. I compiled the fragments, sorted them chronologically by internal narrative structure rather than recording date. What emerged was a chronicle. The death of a pantheon and its resurrection into nightmare. The chronicle began with a hall called Valhalla. Not the metaphorical heaven from ancient myths, but an actual construct in the warp, built from belief accumulated over millennia. Souls of warriors who died dreaming of golden halls and eternal battle. Enough faith, enough psychic resonance, to create something almost real in the Imperium's malleable substance. The gods had lived there in the way that warp entities live, half memory, half daemon, sustained by echoes of worship from scattered human worlds. Then the Emperor came. The Great Crusade reached Fenris and her daughter colonies. The imperial truth was absolute. There are no gods but the Emperor, no faith but in humanity's manifest destiny. The word-bearers hadn't yet turned. The chaplains preached reason and enlightenment. The old religions were systematically dismantled, not through persecution, that would have been kinder. Through education, through truth, through demonstrating that thunder was atmospheric discharge, that winter was axial tilt, that death was biochemical cessation. The myths became metaphors, the gods became stories, the worship stopped. In the warp, Valhalla began to dissolve. I saw it through 100 dying psychers' final visions, the golden hall crumbling into screaming faces, the mead benches becoming rivers of liquid suffering, the Einherjar, the honored dead, remembering that they were just echoes given temporary form by belief now withdrawn. They clawed at themselves as they evaporated. They begged gods who were themselves fading for salvation that couldn't come. Odin felt it first. The All-Father, who'd hung himself on the world tree to gain wisdom, felt his consciousness fragmenting. His memories, hues of myth and story, began bleeding into the warp's general madness. He gathered what remained of his pantheon. Thor with his hammer that now felt heavy as a star. Frigg whose wisdom couldn't solve this. Tyr whose courage meant nothing against dissolution. Heimdall who could see everything except their salvation. Baldur who'd died before and would die again endlessly. Loki whose tricks had run out. They had a choice. Fade completely, becoming undifferentiated warp stuff. Or flee deeper into the Imperium, seeking somewhere the Emperor's light didn't reach, hoping to persist until belief returned. They chose flight. They abandoned Valhalla and descended into the warp's depths where chaos reigned absolute, and the dark gods held court. That's where the chronicle's tone changed. The fragments became screams set to narrative structure. I saw Thor in a realm where physics inverted randomly. Gravity became a suggestion. Temperature became a philosophical concept. His hammer fell upward and shattered into light that burned with cold. He caught the pieces, and they cut his hands. His blood became insects that whispered his failures. He fought daemons that wore his face and knew his doubts. Every victory made him weaker, because strength here meant something different. Strength was flexibility, accepting corruption, allowing change. Thor's rigidity, his essence as immovable storm, became prison. The more he resisted, the more the warp pressed against his consciousness, offering evolution he couldn't accept without becoming something other than himself. I saw Frigg in a garden where flowers screamed her children's names. Each bloom contained a memory of a child lost, Baldur to prophecy, Forseti to justice that couldn't scale, Heimdall to duty that meant nothing here. The garden's gardener was Nurgle's handmaiden, who explained with genuine kindness that grief was holy, that remembering the dead was worship, that she could preserve these memories forever in crystallized suffering that would never fade. Frigg refused, and the garden ate her refusal, made it into fertilizer, grew more flowers that screamed louder. She couldn't escape because escape required forgetting, and she wouldn't allow her children's memory to die even as it devoured her. I saw Tyr, god of war and justice, in a Colosseum where daemons of Khorne judged him. They showed him every war he'd blessed, every battle he'd sanctified with his presence. They tallied the deaths, billions across human history, billions more across the ages when humans still believed. They asked him what justice those deaths served, what law was upheld by children orphaned, cities burned, civilizations shattered. Tyr's answer was duty. Warriors needed a god to give their deaths meaning. The daemons laughed and showed him the truth. The warriors had given his existence meaning, not the reverse. He was parasite dressed as purpose. The revelation shattered something in him. His sword arm, already missing his hand from ancient myth, began to dissolve further. The corruption spread slowly, because he couldn't decide if they were wrong. I saw Heimdall at the gates of nothing, watching everything. His gift was sight across all realms, but in the warp, there were too many realms and they shifted constantly. He saw every possible future, every branching nightmare, every outcome of every choice. He saw Balder dying in 17 million different ways. He saw Thor corrupted into a daemon prince, saw Frigg become a plague mother, saw Odin fragment into 1,000 lesser entities. He saw himself standing at these gates forever, unable to act because every action branched into horrors. Perfect sight became perfect paralysis. Tienche's daemons visited him sometimes to comment on what he was seeing, offering suggestions he couldn't evaluate, because he saw the consequences of accepting and of refusing, and they were equally terrible. I saw Balder dying repeatedly in a time loop maintained by Slaneshi daemons who'd discovered that divine suffering had a particular flavor. His death was beautiful, they explained. His resurrection was hope. His awareness that he'd die again was exquisite despair. They'd found the perfect cycle: death, hope, despair, repeat. Balder begged them to let him stay dead. They explained that death for gods wasn't cessation, merely transformation, and they preferred this transformation to any other. His screams became music, his blood became paint, his suffering became art. And because he was divine, because he'd once embodied light and purity, his corruption was infinitely more delicious than mortal anguish. I saw Loki doing what Loki had always done, adapting. The trickster god found that chaos was his native element. The warp's mutations didn't horrify him, they offered possibility. He began making deals with daemons, trading scraps of divine essence for knowledge, for power, for survival. He became something between god and daemon, neither fully one nor the other. He smiled with too many mouths and wept with eyes that migrated across his flesh and still called himself Loki, even as the name meant less with every transformation. He visited his fellow gods in their torments and offered bargains: accept corruption and survive, resist and dissolve. They refused. He called them fools and left them to their suffering. Later fragments suggested even Loki's adaptability had limits, that eventually the deals cost more than he could pay, that the trickster was running out of tricks. And Odin, the All-Father. The recordings showed him in a throne room constructed from his own fading memories. Every time he forgot something, the walls became less stable. He was forgetting the names of his children, forgetting the faces of worshippers, forgetting what Valhalla had looked like before it fell. He'd traded his eye for wisdom in myth, but wisdom in the warp meant knowing that everything he'd been was illusion, that gods were merely thoughts given shape by belief, that the Emperor had been right. There were no gods, only psychic constructs. Odin was watching himself become a lie that couldn't sustain its own existence. He sat on a throne made of forgetting and tried to remember why existence had ever mattered. The final recordings were recent. Within the last 5 years, they showed something new and infinitely worse. The dark gods had noticed the dying pantheon, not with hostility, with curiosity. 4 fragments of divine power, untethered from any patron force, suffering in realms controlled by chaos. What would happen? The dark gods wondered if they offered mercy, if they extended hands to drowning gods and offered salvation in exchange for service. The recordings showed the offers. Khorne offering Thor purpose: you love battle. Serve the blood god and battle eternally without the weakness of mercy or restraint. Nurgle offering Frigg preservation: Your children can live forever in my garden, never changing, never lost, crystallized in perfect memory. Tiench offering Heimdall meaning, all that sight could serve a greater purpose, feeding the architect of fate's infinite schemes. Slaanesh offering Baldur transformation, become art eternal, you're suffering the masterpiece that defines divine anguish. And something else, something the recordings could barely capture. A fifth voice, quieter than the others, offering Odin not service but truth. This voice came from the warp's deepest places, where the Chaos gods themselves sometimes feared to look. It offered knowledge of what the Emperor really was. It showed Odin visions, the Emperor's first meetings with the Chaos gods on Molech, the bargains struck, the power claimed. It revealed the imperial truth as the cruelest lie, denying humanity's gods while the Emperor carved out godhood for himself. It offered Odin a choice. Become truly what the Emperor had become. Psychic parasite feeding on human faith while denying the faithful any return. Or resist and dissolve into nothing, taking the truth with him into oblivion. The recordings ended there. The final Psyker's death echo contained only one phrase, repeated in Old Norse, Vi velger tredje vei, we choose the third way. I didn't understand. I compiled my findings into an unauthorized report spanning 700 pages, cross-referenced every fragment, built timeline and analysis matrices that violated 36 information security protocols. I worked for 16 weeks without filing the discoveries, without seeking authorization, because I needed to understand before reporting. Because something in the chronicle mattered in ways I couldn't articulate. The Inquisition found me during third shift, 73rd day of my unauthorized investigation. 2 members of Ordo Malleus, full panoply of psychic wards and null field generators. They knew exactly what I'd been researching. They'd been monitoring my archive access for 6 weeks. They'd let me continue, because they wanted to see what conclusions I'd reach. The lead inquisitor was a woman whose augmetic eyes clicked when she focused. She read my report in silence while I stood at attention in archive chamber secundus. The temperature was still 11 degrees. Cold enough to preserve data. Cold enough that I could see her breath when she finally spoke. You've assembled something no one else has managed in 2 centuries. 473 fragments. Coherent timeline, analysis of psychic entity degradation in warp environments absent worship sustenance. Impressive work. Completely unauthorized, technically heretical, but impressive. Her partner stood by the door, hand resting on a bolt pistol. Young for an inquisitor, maybe 40 standard years. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes had the hollow quality of someone who'd stared at things that stared back. You understand what you found? She asked. Her voice was flat. Tired in a way that suggested decades of exhaustion. Not mythology bleeding into psycho dreams. Not cultural memory. Actual psychic entities, God constructs created by millennia of human worship, dying in the warp because the Emperor's truth severed their sustenance. You've documented divine extinction. I nodded. And resurrection. The final fragments suggest they're choosing the third way. Yes, we know. She set down the report. Her hands were shaking, she noticed. Steadied them deliberately against the table. We've known for 3 years. Your work confirmed patterns we'd only suspected. Thank you for that. Now the question becomes whether you continue serving the Emperor or whether your curiosity has crossed into corruption. The hollow-eyed Inquisitor spoke for the first time. The Norse gods aren't dead. They're evolving, adapting to the warp's nature while trying to remain themselves. They're attempting to become something new, not quite gods, not quite daemons. Entities that can exist in the immaterium without worship, without chaos patronage. Self-sustaining psychic constructs with independent will. That shouldn't be possible, I said. It isn't possible. By every theological and metaphysical framework we understand, it can't work. Gods need worship. Daemons need patron powers. Independent psychic entities require constant soul fuel or they dissolve. The Norse pantheon should have evaporated by now or accepted chaos corruption to survive. They've done neither. They're finding a third way, and we don't know what that means. The woman pulled up additional files on my data slate. 3 months ago, an Astra Militarum regiment defending Fenris Secundus reported battlefield hallucinations. Warriors in ancient armor fighting alongside them against World Eaters war bands. The warriors wielded weapons that killed daemons. Actual daemons, not warp constructs, not possessed. Daemons dissolved at their touch. Command assumed combat fatigue. Then the reports spread. 7 different war zones in Fenris subsector, always the same. Warriors in furs and iron, fighting chaos with weapons that shouldn't function but do. She showed me picked captures. Grainy, distorted by warp interference. But clear enough. A massive figure with a hammer wreathed in lightning that looked nothing like electricity and everything like rage made manifest. A one-handed warrior whose presence made daemons hesitate. A woman whose voice, when captured on Vox recorders, made chaos cultists weep and surrender. They're not helping us, the hollow-eyed Inquisitor said. They're using us. Human battlefields give them purpose. Fighting chaos gives them definition. We are not you, we are your enemies. Every daemon they destroy reinforces their separation from the dark gods. Every human they fight alongside generates new belief, new psychic resonance. They're rebuilding their worship base one battlefield at a time. The Emperor's truth forbids worship of false gods. I said automatically. The Emperor's truth is failing. The woman's voice cracked slightly. She took a breath, steadied herself. We'll lose 1,000,000 worlds a day to ignorance. The Astronomicon flickers. Chaos advances on every front. The Imperium fragments, and in the darkness people pray. Not to the Emperor, he's too distant, too incomprehensible. They pray to simpler gods. Gods who answer. Gods who fight beside them. Gods who die for them and return. The Norse pantheon is building a new mythology on humanity's desperation. She closed the files. Looked at me with augmetic eyes that held something that might have been despair. Here's what we've concluded. The Norse gods found their third way, parasitic symbiosis. They protect humans from chaos. Humans provide worship. They're becoming localized warp entities, smaller than the dark gods but independent. Sustainable. Replicable. Replicable, I repeated. There were thousands of human religions before the Emperor. Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, Shinto, Olympic, Celtic. All supposedly dead, killed by the imperial truth. Their gods dissolved into the warp like everything else. But if the Norse pantheon can survive, can adapt, can find a way to exist without worship, dependence, what's stopping the others? What if the warp is full of dying gods looking for the same solution? What if Odin isn't the first to find it? The hollow-eyed Inquisitor pulled his bolt pistol, not aiming at me, just holding it, looking at it like he was trying to remember why he carried it. We're Ordo Malleus. We hunt daemons. But these aren't daemons. They're not benevolent. They're not answering prayers from mercy. They're harvesting belief to sustain their existence. But they're killing daemons. Protecting humans. Operating according to codes of honor and duty that predate the Imperium. How do we classify entities that aren't chaos but aren't loyal to the Emperor? How do we fight gods who save the very humans we're sworn to protect? The woman stood. We've assembled a task force. 60 Inquisitors across 4 ordos, 300 support staff, unlimited access to Black Ship archives. We're tracking every psychic echo that matches pre-imperial religious frameworks. We're building a complete picture of what's happening in the warp's depths while the Imperium crumbles. You're being offered a position on that task force. Your analytical skills are exactly what we need. And if I refuse, she smiled. It didn't reach her augmetic eyes. Then you're a security risk who's accessed classified materials without authorization and built an unauthorized archive documenting Zeno's theology. The usual penalties apply. Execution or mind wiping. You understand the necessity. Mercy doesn't scale, I said quietly, remembering something I'd read in the fragments. A phrase attributed to an imperial commander justifying orbital bombardment. You can spare 1 researcher. Then 10 researchers demand the same. Then the security apparatus fractures. Exactly. I chose certainty over mercy 30 years ago when I joined the Inquisition. I made that choice knowing what it meant. I sleep poorly. But I sleep better than if I'd done nothing and watched forbidden knowledge spread through the Imperium unchecked. She paused. Your choice is simpler. Help us understand what's happening, or die ignorant. Those are the only options the Imperium offers anymore. I looked at my archive. 19 years of meticulous work. 43,000 psychic death recordings, each one a soul consumed by the Emperor's hunger. Each one logged with precision I'd been proud of. Now contaminated by 473 impossible memories of gods who refused to stay dead. I accept. Good. Report to Inquisitor Vox Command Center, sublevel 94, 6th hour tomorrow. Bring your complete analysis, all of it. Don't hold anything back out of some misplaced notion of protecting dangerous knowledge. We need everything to understand what's coming. They left. The door sealed behind them. I sat in Archive Chamber Secundus, 11 degrees cold, surrounded by millions of deaths I'd catalogue. I pulled up the final recording again. The psyker from Norn's Reach who'd carried Odin's last words. We velja treji ve. We choose the third way. I ran the fragment through linguistic analysis, searching for deeper meaning. Old Norse had layers, context-dependent interpretation. Treje ve could mean third path, third option, third solution. But in context of the mythology, of the choice the dark gods offered, it meant something more specific. The first way was dissolution. The second way was corruption. The third way was synthesis, remaining themselves while becoming something new. Not gods dependent on worship. Not daemons serving chaos, something that had never existed before. I thought about the Imperium, built on the Emperor's lie that there are no gods while he claimed godhood for himself. Built on consuming 1,000 psychers daily to sustain the Astronomicon. Built on systematic cruelty dressed as necessity. The Norse gods had faced dissolution and corruption, and chosen to invent a new existence. What did that make them? Saviors or parasites? Protectors or predators? What did it make us, who served an emperor that demanded everything and offered only continued survival in return? I filed my notes, prepared my complete analysis for transfer, and wondered if the task force understood what they were really researching. Not just the Norse gods' survival strategy, but a blueprint, a demonstration that the Imperium's foundational lie, that gods were impossible, that faith was weakness, that only the Emperor's light mattered, was false. That gods could exist without worship, that belief could be mutual, that protection could flow both ways, that humanity might have alternatives to the Emperor's truth, that we'd been forbidden from considering for 10,000 years. I reported to sublevel 94 at 6th hour the next day. The command center was carved from ship rock, no windows, temperature kept at 8 degrees. Colder than the archives. Cold enough to feel permanent. Inquisitor Vok was waiting. Tall, scarred, one arm replaced with an augmetic that ended in too many fingers. He gestured to a seat. You're the Lex mechanic who compiled the Norse timeline. We need someone who understands psychic echo analysis. He activated a holith display. Images flickered, gods I didn't recognize. A woman with 8 arms. A man with an elephant head. A figure made of flame and compassion. Hindu pantheon. 740, 6 confirmed sightings across Segmentum Pacificus. They're doing exactly what the Norse gods are doing. Fighting chaos, protecting human populations, harvesting worship, building new mythology on old foundations. Another gesture, different gods, Olympic pantheon, Segmentum Solar, periphery regions. Zeus throwing lightning at daemons. Athena commanding human soldiers. They're less organized than the Norse or Hindu entities, still finding their methodology, but the pattern's identical. More images. Gods from religions I'd learned were extinct. Buddhist bodhisattvas manifesting in the warp as beings of pure compassion, absorbing daemon attacks and transforming them into enlightenment that dissolved the attackers. Celtic gods rising from human bloodshed on battlefields, growing stronger with every death, using that strength to protect the dying. Shinto kami appearing wherever humans showed reverence for nature, fighting Nurgle's plagues with purification rituals that actually worked. Christian saints manifesting to defend the faithful, their miracles fueled not by the Emperor, but by desperate prayers to figures the Imperium had tried to erase. It's an epidemic. Vox said quietly. Why estimate 70, 3 different religious frameworks have achieved what we're calling WARP, autonomous sustainability, gods that don't need constant worship to exist. They feed on it, yes, but they can persist through long periods without belief by entering dormancy and awakening when prayer resumes. They're becoming permanent warp fixtures. Alternative powers to chaos. Alternative powers to the Emperor. He met my eyes. His were grey, exhausted, carrying weight I couldn't measure. The Imperium is built on singular loyalty to the Emperor. Our theology permits no rivals, no other protectors, no other gods. But these entities are protecting billions of humans we can't protect ourselves. They're killing daemons we don't have forces to fight. They're holding territory we've already written off as lost. How do we condemn something that's keeping the Imperium alive? You're asking me to solve a theological contradiction, I said. I'm asking you to help us understand it. We have 3 options. He held up 3 augmetic fingers. 1. Declare these entities heretical and deploy all available forces to destroy them. Accept the billions of human casualties that result when their protection vanishes. Maintain ideological purity at the cost of catastrophic material loss. 2. Tacitly permit their existence while officially denying it. Allow the protection to continue but refuse to acknowledge it, creating a dual system where official doctrine and practical reality diverge. 3. Fundamentally rewrite imperial theology to permit limited polytheism. Integrate these entities as lesser powers serving under the emperor's overarching authority. He leaned back. His augmetic hand twitched. All 3 options are acceptable to different factions. The ecclesiarchy demands option 1. The administratum prefers option 2. Progressive elements in the Inquisition argue for option 3. We're deadlocked. Meanwhile, more gods awaken. More humans pray to them. More of the Imperium's foundation erodes. What do you believe? I asked. He laughed. Short, bitter sound. I believe the emperor made a mistake. I believe the imperial truth was correct philosophically but catastrophic practically. You can't tell humans that gods don't exist and then leave them defenseless against divine predators. Nature abhors a vacuum. We created one by destroying human religion. The dark gods filled it. Now these resurrected pantheons are trying to reclaim it. We're watching a warp ecosystem rebalance itself after 10,000 years of imperial disruption, and we don't have the power to stop it even if stopping it were the right choice. He pulled up another file. Your Norse analysis showed something crucial. The gods aren't static, they're learning, adapting. Odin spent subjective centuries in the warp before finding his solution. He studied the dark gods, learned from them without serving them. He understood something fundamental. Gods need humans, but humans need gods. Mutual parasitism can become mutual symbiosis if both sides accept limitations. Gods provide protection. Humans provide worship. Neither side dominates. Both survive. That's not what the Emperor teaches. The Emperor teaches that he is humanity's only protection and we owe him everything. But the Emperor is failing Hadris. The Astronomicon flickers. The Golden Throne deteriorates. The Primarchs are dead or daemon princes or missing. We're losing. And into that failure, these alternative powers are rising, offering what the Emperor promised but can't deliver: protection that responds to prayer, intervention that saves the desperate, hope that isn't contingent on impossible quotas, and acceptable losses measured in billions. He stood, walked to the hololith, staring at the images of resurrected gods. I joined the Inquisition believing in absolute loyalty to the Emperor, spent 60 years hunting heretics, killed thousands who prayed to false gods. Now I'm commanding a task force trying to determine if those false gods are humanity's last hope. The irony isn't lost on me. What do you need from me? Analysis. Every psychic fragment you can compile. Every pattern you can identify. These gods are evolving. We need to predict the next stage. Will they remain localized protectors? Or will they unify? Will Odin negotiate with Zeus, with Shiva, with Buddha? Will they form a coalition against chaos? Against the Emperor? We need to know what's coming so we can prepare, whatever preparation means anymore. I worked the task force for 4 years, analyzed 17,000 psychic fragments, built taxonomies of divine resurrection patterns, classified gods by origin mythology, power level, adaptation strategy, human interaction model. I watched the data accumulate and the patterns emerge and the conclusion become inescapable. The gods were winning. Not against chaos, that war was eternal stalemate, but against imperial doctrine. Every battlefield where Thor fought daemons generated new worship. Every miracle attributed to Ganesha undermined the Emperor's monopoly on divine intervention. Every prayer answered by resurrected gods was a prayer not directed to the Golden Throne. The Imperium was losing its theological foundation one desperate soul at a time. The ecclesiarchy demanded action, ordered the Inquisition to deploy forces to suppress worse worship of false gods. Vok refused, said we didn't have forces to spare, said suppressing the worship would mean abandoning the humans being protected to chaos predation, said the cure would be worse than the disease. The ecclesiarchy called him heretic. He agreed and kept working. The breaking point came when the Hindu pantheon manifested in full force on Kaidia. During the 13th Black Crusade, when Abaddon's forces shattered the pylons and the Eye of Terror expanded, when everything was failing and the Imperium's last stand teetered on annihilation, Shiva appeared. Shiva the Destroyer, dancing through daemon hordes, destroying them not with violence but with transformation, turning their essence back into undifferentiated warp energy. The Imperial Guard soldiers fighting beside him reported feeling hope for the first time in years. Hope, the thing the Imperium had systematically bred out of humanity and replaced with duty. The ecclesiarchy couldn't ignore it, couldn't suppress it, couldn't deny it. Shiva saved Kaidia, or delayed its fall long enough for evacuation. Either way, he acted when the Emperor didn't, when the Golden Throne was silent, when humanity's God Emperor provided no intervention and alternative gods did. The theological crisis was immediate and absolute. Either acknowledge that other divine powers could protect humanity, invalidating the imperial truth, or condemn Shiva for heresy despite him saving billions. The ecclesiarchy chose the second option, declared Shiva's manifestation a chaos trick, ordered memories purged, witnesses silenced, records destroyed. Vok showed me the purge orders in his quarters. 8th hour past midnight bell. Temperature was cold enough to hurt. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in the 4 we'd worked together. His augmetic hand trembled constantly now. He couldn't stop it anymore. They're going to execute 60,000 soldiers who fought beside Shiva. 60,000 witnesses who saw a god that wasn't the Emperor save them from damnation. They're classifying it as chaos, corruption, mass hallucination, anything except the truth. Because the truth breaks everything the Imperium is built on. Are they wrong? I ask. He looked at me with eyes that held no certainty anymore, just exhaustion and doubt. I don't know. If we acknowledge that other gods can protect humanity, we fracture loyalty to the Emperor. If we fracture loyalty, the Imperium collapses. If the Imperium collapses, chaos wins. But if we suppress the truth, we murder 60,000 loyal soldiers and alienate billions more who desperately need hope we can't provide. Both choices lead to catastrophe. I don't know which catastrophe is worse. He pulled up files, execution warrants, 60,000 names, pre-approved by the Inquisitorial Conclave, ready for implementation, all requiring his signature as task force commander. I'm supposed to authorize this. Supposed to sign these and maintain the lie. Supposed to choose certainty over truth. That's what inquisitors do. We make impossible choices and live with the consequences. His hand hovered over the authorization key, shaking, trembling, unable to press down. I can't do it. I've killed thousands for the Emperor, executed heretics, burned worlds, sanctioned genocides in his name. But these aren't heretics. They're loyal soldiers who fought beside a god that answered when ours didn't. I can't kill them for that. I can't make this choice anymore. He looked at me. The Norse gods chose a third way, found a path between dissolution and corruption. I need to find a third way too, between murdering 60,000 innocents and watching the Imperium fragment. There has to be something else. Some option we're not seeing. I thought about Odin, sitting on a throne made of forgetting, watching himself dissolve. Offered service to chaos or oblivion, finding instead synthesis, becoming something new, not God as humans had worshipped, not daemon as chaos defined, something autonomous, something choosing its own nature. What if the Imperium is already dead? I said quietly. Not ended, but transformed beyond recognition. What if we're serving a corpse that doesn't know it's a corpse? What if these resurrected gods aren't destroying the Emperor's domain, but filling the void his failure created? Vok stared at the authorization key. At the 60,000 names waiting for execution. At the choice that wasn't really a choice. I'm going to refuse, he said. I'm going to file a report explaining why these executions violate every principle the Imperium claims to uphold. I'm going to argue that suppressing truth is worse than acknowledging theological complexity. I'm going to force the conclave to either accept my reasoning or execute me for heresy. They'll execute you. I know. I sleep poorly anyway. Might as well die for something that matters instead of signing warrants I know are wrong. He never pressed the authorization key. Filed his report instead, detailed analysis of why the Kaidia manifestation couldn't be suppressed, shouldn't be suppressed, represented a fundamental theological evolution the Imperium needed to accept or perish denying. 700 pages of careful argument, reasoned theology, citations from pre-imperial philosophy and post-heresy necessity. The inquisitorial conclave read it in 2 hours, declared him heretic in 3, executed him by 4th hour, bolt round to the head, no ceremony, body incinerated immediately, appointed his second in command to authorize the 60,000 executions. She did so without hesitation, explaining that mercy didn't scale and uncertainty was the enemy of order. They came for me next. I had access to all of Vok's research, all his conclusions. I was security risk by association. 2 inquisitors, same as when they'd recruited me. Different faces, same exhaustion. They offered me the same choice, serve or die, continue the task force work, or accept execution for exposure to heretical conclusions. I refused. Not out of courage. Out of certainty that the work didn't matter anymore. That we were cataloging a transformation we couldn't stop. That the Imperium was fragmenting not because of these resurrected gods, but because the Emperor's truth had been a beautiful lie that couldn't survive contact with the warp's reality. That somewhere in the Imperium's depths, Odin was watching human civilization tear itself apart over exactly the theological rigidity he'd escaped. They executed me in Archive Chamber Secundus, 11th degree cold, temperature maintained for preservation, ironic, bolt pistol to the head, same as Vok, quick, efficient, necessary. I am dead now. I have been dead for 17 years, not metaphorically. The Inquisition killed me at 9th hour past midnight bell, 73rd year of my service. But before I died, I uploaded my complete analysis to a data core hidden in the archive's deepest sublevel, encrypted with personal cipher known only to me, set to broadcast on open frequencies when the eternal vigil next passes through segmentum obscurus. Because someone must know, someone must remember, someone must understand what happened when the gods awoke in the warp, and the Imperium chose ignorance over adaptation. The Norse pantheon found their third way. Became something new, neither fully God nor fully independent, choosing synthesis over purity. The Imperium faced the same choice, evolve or die maintaining obsolete truth. We chose death. We chose to execute witnesses rather than acknowledge complexity. We chose certainty over survival. I don't know if we were wrong. I don't know if Vok was right. I don't know if these resurrected gods are saviors or parasites, protectors or predators, harvesting belief from desperate humans who have nowhere else to turn. I don't know if the Emperor's truth was lie or necessity. I don't know if his silence at Kydia was failure or calculated test of humanity's self-reliance. All I know is what I recorded. 473 fragments of impossible memory. Gods dying in the warp. Gods refusing to dissolve. Gods learning from chaos without becoming chaos. Gods finding autonomy in a realm that shouldn't permit autonomy. Gods fighting beside humans who prayed when the Emperor didn't answer. The data core will broadcast this testimony when the eternal vigil completes its circuit. Someone will find it. Someone will have to make the choice again. Suppress the truth or accept that the universe is more complex than the Imperium permits. That humanity's survival might require alliances the Emperor forbade. That gods can exist without being enemies. That worship can be mutual rather than extracted. That hope isn't heresy even when it comes from sources imperial doctrine condemns. I served the Emperor for 19 years. Catalogued 43,000 deaths consumed by his hunger. Believed every soul served his light. Then I found evidence that light wasn't the only illumination in the darkness. That other fires burned in the warp's depths. That humanity had options we'd been forbidden from considering. They killed me for that knowledge. Killed Vok for refusing to suppress it. Killed 60,000 soldiers for witnessing it. Will kill whoever finds this testimony and chooses truth over convenient lies. But the gods remain, growing stronger, learning faster, building new mythologies on old foundations. Offering protection the Imperium can't provide and hope the Emperor won't permit. They chose the third way, found synthesis, became something unprecedented. We had the same choice. We chose execution instead. The warp's echo continues. The gods' song grows louder, and the Imperium fragments, deaf to alternatives, blind to options, committed to singular truth even as that truth fails to preserve the very humanity it claims to protect. I am dead now. I have been dead for 17 years. My testimony is complete. My analysis is recorded, my choice is made. To whoever finds this vi velja tregi ve. We choose the third way. Choose better than we did. Choose survival over purity. Choose complexity over comfortable lies. Choose hope even when hope requires acknowledging powers the Imperium forbids. Choose to live instead of dying for doctrines that no longer serve the living. The archive temperature is maintained at 11 degrees. Cold enough to preserve data. Cold enough to preserve this testimony. Cold enough to preserve the truth they tried to bury with me. Remember, adapt, survive, the gods did, perhaps humanity still can.